The third facet of the secret combination is a one-world government or New World Order, which is a world governed by the United Nations. Speaking of the UN Charter in 1945, J. Reuben Clark said the following: "There seems no reason to doubt that such real approval as the Charter has among the people is based upon the belief that if the Charter is put into effect, wars will end. The Charter will not certainly end war. Some will ask why not. In the first place, there is no provision in the Charter itself that contemplates ending war. It is true the Charter provides for force to bring peace, but such use of force is itself war. The Charter is built to prepare for war, not to promote peace. The Charter is a war document, not a peace document. Not only does the Charter organization not prevent future wars, but it makes it practically certain that we shall have future wars. And as to such wars, it takes from us the power to declare them, to choose the side on which we shall fight, to determine what forces and military equipment we shall use in the war, and to control and command our sons who do the fighting." Elder Stephen L. Richards, in Conference Report, October of 1947, said the following: "Have you ever heard of a voice being raised in any of the sessions of the United Nations since its inception more than 2 years ago, protesting the infractions of God's laws or importuning his help in achieving the purposes of that organization? I think you have not, unless perhaps in some innocuous way, because I suspect that it is tacitly agreed that God and religion shall be shut out of the proceedings. Well, my friends, it is a part of the message that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints bears to the world, that God and religion cannot be shut out from the consideration of world affairs without mortal hazard to the cause of goodness and peace." Albert E. Bowen, in Conference Report, October of 1950, said the following: "We seem to be trying now to rear a government whose proponents and sponsors cannot even invoke divine blessing upon their deliberations for its destiny. What chance do you think it has to heal the wounds of the world?" Let us now read some statements from President Ezra Taft Benson's book, "An Enemy Hath Done This," pages 201, 202, and 203. "It has always been a source of amazement to me how so many Americans properly are concerned over the growth of big government and the welfare state here at home, but continue to give their unqualified support to the UN, which incorporates every doctrine which they abhor. The reason, I suppose, is that too few of us have taken the time or felt the need to find out just what is the concept of government at the UN. After many years of observing the UN in operation, after carefully researching the less publicized aspects of this organization, and after a great deal of soul-searching, I reluctantly have been forced to the conclusion that the UN's potential for evil far outweighs its potential for good. Furthermore, the very nature of the organization is such that this evil cannot be corrected without disbanding and starting all over from the bottom up. I wish with all my heart that this were not true, but it is true, and the issue is far too important for the future of mankind to allow sentimentality to cloud our vision. It's about time someone placed principle above popularity and came right out and spoke the truth. Supporters of the UN often tell us how wonderful it is that all nations can come together under a single room and air their problems in open debate. The implication, of course, is that this procedure is a way of blowing off steam, a safety valve that somehow reduces the international tensions that otherwise might lead to war. How utterly absurd. As the UN diplomats stand in front of the General Assembly, shake their fingers at each other, hurl insults at each other, and then ask all nations of the world to choose up sides, far from being a procedure calculated to preserve peace, this kind of madness can only increase the likelihood of war. Let us now go to the statement of Secretary General U. Thant of the United Nations in a press dispatch in the Los Angeles Times of April 7, 1970. "Lenin was a man with a mind of great clarity and incisiveness, and his ideas have had a profound influence on the course of contemporary history. Lenin's ideals of peace and peaceful coexistence among states have won widespread international acceptance, and they are in line with the aims of the UN Charter." In its issue for December 12, 1952, U.S. News and World Report noted, "An informed estimate suggests that as many as one-half of the 1,350 administrative executives in the UN are either communists or people who are willing to do what they want." On March 22, 1954, the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee reported, "In our investigation of United States citizens employed by the United Nations, we found considerable evidence to indicate that communists use the same techniques in infiltrating the UN Secretariat as had previously been used in infiltrating the United States government. Some of these persons exposed in our government investigation played key roles in the actual establishment of the UN itself, as well as the establishment of the UN's specialized agencies." On February 14, 1961, United Nations Ambassador Adlai Stevenson addressed the United Nations Correspondents Association and stated, "Help us to create the sense of our overriding human concern. Interpret us to each other not as plotters or as warmongers or as demons or demigods, but as puzzled yet aspiring men and women struggling on the possible brink of Armageddon to achieve a common understanding and a common approach. We are not at all like that, I have no doubt. But I believe the majority of our delegates would accept such a description of their own attitudes. The whole press corps working at the United Nations has a unique part to play in projecting this picture." In Christian Economics of August 6, 1963, Mr. George Winter stated, "The United Nations is not a Christian organization. It is unashamedly godless. Christian principles have no guiding influence on the majority of the nations whose representatives in the United Nations now sit in judgment on the Congo, and tomorrow may claim jurisdiction over the Panama Canal, the Guantanamo Naval Base, the Guantanamo Naval Base, and indeed over the whole world. One cannot be precise, but probably the majority of the members of the United Nations are dictatorships having no idea of justice as understood by Christian nations. How many gods are worshipped in that edifice of steel and glass on the East River in New York it is impossible to say. For aught we know, the dark gods of Dahomey and Behin may have their followers there, seeking to govern the world. But the most evil and probably the most powerful of all the gods worshipped in that United Nations is undoubtedly that evil spirit men call economic determinism, which fills its worshippers with a fanatical enmity for human freedom. Only a civilization which has lost confidence in the Christian code upon which it was built would submit to the moral authority of such a body as the United Nations. Man has created a godless power to govern the world. Can human folly reach greater depths? In light of all that we have learned about the United Nations, let us now take the words of President George Bush. In the televised address of September 1990, he spoke the following words: "Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order, can emerge. We are now in sight of a United Nations that performs as envisioned by its founders." His statement in U.S. News and World Report of January 7, 1991. "I think what's at stake here is the new world order. What's at stake here is whether we can have disputes peacefully resolved in the future by a reinvigorated United Nations, or will the United Nations, its peacekeeping function, having been elevated to its most promising height since 1948, be sent back to the Dark Ages because we failed to fulfill its mandate." In a press conference of January 9, 1991, he stated, "The Gulf crisis has to do with a new world order, and that world order is only going to be enhanced if this newly activated peacekeeping function of the United Nations proves to be effective. That is the only way the new world order will be enhanced." And finally, in a televised address of January 16, 1991, "When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders." President Bush evidently defines a new world order as a United Nations that performs as envisioned by its founders. The United States delegation to the founding of the United Nations contains 16 secret communists led by Alger Hiss and 43 members of the World Government Promoting Council on Foreign Relations. These individuals helped lay the groundwork for an all-powerful UN supposedly designed to enforce peace. But if this UN is all-powerful, it can also enforce tyranny. In the book Prophets, Principles, and National Survival by Gerald L. Newquist, on page 457, we read the following: "Frankly now, are we as rational beings, in the light of history, the signs of the times, and the revelations of the Restoration and the Bible, realistically justified in putting our hopes and expectations for peace in the United Nations?" As of November 11, 1990, the United Nations was recognized as the only power holding the authority to wage war. Our own President, George Bush, went not to Congress first, but to the UN Security Council for authority to wage war in Iraq. Thus, he evidently believes the UN Charter is more valid than our Constitution, and it is here that his allegiance lies. President Theodore Roosevelt stated, "Patriotism means to stand by the country. It does not mean to stand by the President or any other public official, save exactly to the degree in which he himself stands by the country. It is patriotic to support him insofar as he efficiently serves the country. It is unpatriotic not to oppose him to the exact extent that by inefficiency or otherwise he fails in his duty to stand by the country." In the book None Dare Call It Conspiracy by Gary Allen, all of the facets of the secret combination are discussed: the international bankers, socialism, communism, the United Nations, and the New World Order. Let us recap again. Number 1, the United Nations Charter is a war document, not a peace document. Number 2, there is no place for God in the UN, and its potential for evil far outweighs its potential for good. Number 3, the Charter of the United Nations is opposite to our Constitution, and if adhered to, would destroy us. Number 4, the United Nations Charter is in line with the aims of Vladimir Lenin. Number 5, only a civilization which has lost confidence in the Christian code would be governed by the United Nations. Number 6, President Bush agrees that the United Nations Charter should govern the world. Number 7, the United Nations is the world government of the secret combination.